After wrapping up a very significant severe weather outbreak where we had multiple tornadoes, some intense, especially up in Illinois, Indiana, and Kankakee County, we unfortunately had a deadly, very strong tornado rip up some houses, severe thunderstorms all across the Central Plains. Everything is sliding to the east. This initial severe weather threat is ending, and we're getting a pattern change taking place. We have some colder air coming in and a clipper system that'll bring a threat of snow, and even later on in the forecast, we have a much bigger cold blast coming that'll catch many of us off guard and could bring back freezes for much of the central and eastern US. The weather is staying active. We have a lot more stuff to talk about even after the severe weather threat has ended. Today is Thursday, March 12th, and in this video of the world of weather, I'll go through everything you need to know. As I'm recording this late Thursday, we still have our line of storms moving to the east. At about 7 p.m. Central, we still have some tornado watches, some severe thunderstorm warnings out ahead of this line. Overall though, this line is weakening to sub-severe levels, and through the rest of today and into Friday, it'll continue moving off to the east. Look out to the north and west. Look at all these alerts though that are building back up. These aren't for rain or any sort of severe weather. This is actually a lot of wind alerts. All this yellow to kind of beige color, that's high wind watches or high wind warnings, and that means very windy conditions, potentially damaging winds are coming. We also have some red flag warnings here in the pink, and then some winter storm watches and warnings here in the blue and lighter shade of pink. So a lot is happening. Let's break down the timing and what all of these alerts mean for where you live in these areas. Just to start off, we're going to continue tracking our line of storms east. This is the same system that brought those very strong tornadoes and just the severe weather havoc on Tuesday, even today on Wednesday. By the time you're likely watching this on Thursday, we'll still have some storms moving across portions of the south, generally sub-severe, but a few individual instances of gusty winds, maybe some small hail is possible. Georgia, the Carolinas, Florida, you have kind of the best chance of the severe weather. Notice also on the backside, we get a little bit of snow as some of that colder air crashes in behind the front. So you can see from Virginia up into some of the Appalachian Mountains, DC, we could get a brief burst of snow, maybe some locally heavy snow. The thing is, the ground is pretty warm, and we are getting later into March where we get more daylight, so more time for melting. Not much is going to stick, but 1 to 2 inches of snow is possible, and this might catch you off guard, especially considering all the severe weather we've been talking about lately. Even New York, you could get a few flakes in on your day Thursday, so just watch out for that, your Thursday evening commute, and then everything will kind of move offshore, and we'll finally be done with the system. In portions of the southeast, there's a marginal 1 out of 5 risk for a few severe storms possible, but overall the severe threat is pretty limited, much lower than what we've had the past few days. Okay, so we're clearing out of that system. What's coming in behind is some colder air behind our cold front. Now actually the air coming in, it's not going to be all that cold for March standards. It'll be a little bit below average. The bigger story though is how warm it was ahead of the front. These very well above average temperatures, making it feel more like April and even May in some spots. When we get some of that colder air, it's going to make it feel that much colder, even though this is more normal. So just because it's been so warm, that's why this will come as a bit of a shock. Highs back in the 40s, some freezes in the north at night, so some seasonably cooler air is coming in, and we want to make sure that no one is caught off guard by that. Here's a look at the temperatures. You can very clearly see that front, about a 20 to 30 degree temperature drop once the front clears your area. 20s, 30s coming in behind, especially across the north. Again, still some freezes possible, and then the high temperatures in the 60s and 50s. A little bit of warmer air moving into the plains on Thursday, but cooler out in the east. Friday morning will probably be the coldest across the south, where widespread 40s and 30s are possible, and then a bit of a warm up takes place before our second cold blast arrives next week. We'll have more details on that in just a minute. Now, as that cold blast comes in, we are tracking our next weather system, and it's going to be a quick clipper system moving through some of the northern states. So this will be very localized impacts, but those who it does impact, it could impact pretty hard. So here is the area of low pressure right here over North Dakota. This is at 1 p.m. Thursday, and notice the system very fast, it just zips across the northern plains. Things I want to point out though is look how close these isobars are. See these lines on the map? These are the lines of pressure, and the fact that they're so close together, that means this will be a very windy and very potent system. So as it crosses, even more so than the precipitation, the wind will be a very big impact. Notice it grazes northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and then it kind of fizzles out over the northeast. So a quick burst of snow, rain, and wind is coming, especially across some of those northern states. The wind is pretty concerning. That's why we have those high wind warnings in effect. Some of these yellow colors, that's some wind gusts up to 60-70 miles per hour, even up to 80 miles per hour in some spots, and that could lead to some localized power outages, cause some dangerous travel conditions, especially if you're going on north to southbound roads, because the wind will be coming from the west, so that'll make it harder to travel. Snap down some tree limbs, blow around garbage cans, that sort of thing. So this could be a little bit more impactful than your average nuisance wind event. It might be something you'll want to plan ahead for and just pay attention to in case the power goes out. Maybe have some backup lights and stuff on standby. Some very gusty winds across the Dakotas on your day Thursday, and then as the clipper system zips to the northeast, the Midwest, we could have 50-60 mile per hour wind gusts. Very bad hair day, very windy weather. Eventually you can see the core of the wind moving into the northeast and then kind of fizzling out as that clipper system fizzles out as well. So a brief shot of wind that we'll definitely want to pay attention to. It's going to be pretty potent for the areas that it does hit. Finally, tracking out some of that precipitation, we get some of it entering into Minnesota later on Thursday, and then eventually advancing further east into northern Wisconsin. The rain snow line is not too concrete right now, but somewhere around Wisconsin we'll have a transition from rain to snow, and then much of Michigan we'll see a brief burst of some heavy snow. Keep in mind though, this snow, even though it'll be pretty quick, it will be heavy when it comes, and it'll be coming with all that wind, so that will lead to some blowing snow, low visibility, and maybe some isolated spots of blizzard conditions before everything kind of fades away. The northeast and interior New England, we could get a brief dusting of snow, but the big cities along the coast, I-95 corridor, y'all will mainly stay dry from this system. Tracking some of the snowfall totals, there could be some localized significant spots. It will be some pretty heavy snow when it does come, so widespread 4 to 8 inches I'm thinking across this area, but we'll have some higher totals of possibly up to a foot possible. In this part of the country, it's not too uncommon in March, but just considering we've been very warm, we've been in the 60s in portions of this area this past week, this will be a bit of a shock, so making sure we're just getting back into the winter mode for this, especially with some of that low visibility with some of the blinding snow and wind that's coming. The last threat that the wind will be bringing is picking up fire concerns. We have elevated to critical in the red for fire weather across portions of the plains on Friday. This doesn't mean there are fires currently in place, but it just means the weather is primed such that if a fire developed, it could spread very easily. So just making sure we're staying weather aware and doing our part to not accidentally start any burns. Alright, so we talked about the colder air, the wind, the brief bursts of snow in the north. I do want to give you your first warning for a potentially stronger system heading into next week. The models have been pretty consistent for the past few days now of bringing a much bigger blast of cold air into the beginning and middle part of next week, which for many schools across the US is spring break. So we have that colder air, that cold blast loading into portions of the plains on Monday, and then it'll just spill across the country. Much below average temperatures are possible across the central and eastern US, with potentially a core of colder air across portions of the Midwest. So this can not only bring back some very cold air to the north, especially for March standards, we could be talking about wind chills near to even below zero possible. It could also bring some freezes pretty far south, areas that have seen a lot of spring development, a lot of plants blooming with all the warmth lately. Well, we could have a late season freeze catch some of us off guard, so that's something we're going to want to pay attention to, especially considering how late season this is. That colder air will linger for some time, especially in the central and eastern US. Temperatures, this is one of the colder models, so I'd say this is a worst case scenario in terms of freeze conditions, but notice as we're waking up Monday morning, very cold air is spilling back down to the single digits, potentially for temperatures in portions of the plains, 30s extending all the way into Texas. Your daytime highs on Monday might not get out of the 40s for many areas in the south, and even in the north we might not get above freezing. So this is feeling much more like February, and indeed much colder than this February was. This February was very warm. Notice on your day Tuesday morning, this is when the freezes could potentially extend south into portions of the deep south if we get some of these freezes in Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi, which again, this is one of the colder models, so there's still some wiggle room on either side for the temperatures, but if this happens, this could be impactful to some vegetation, especially considering gardens might have started and a lot of those trees kind of bloomed early because of the early start to spring we had. We'll have more updates on this as we get closer, but this next cold snap could be pretty significant. Look at this up in the north, we could have some pretty brutal temperatures as well. Now with the colder air, there is the potential for some snow and precipitation and maybe even some severe weather with it. I'm going to be pretty vague because the details are still pretty blurry, but notice the GFS model spins up a pretty decent swath of snow on the backside across portions of the northern plains, even central plains, so it's still a moving target we'll watch. And then out ahead of the system, as a cold front meets some warmer air, we could also be tracking another severe storm threat. Nothing concrete, this is definitely not going to be as strong as the past few days of severe weather threat, but this will be our next weather maker, so we'll just track it over the next few days, and again I'll have more updates as we get closer and can nail down the specifics a little better. So that's all for us. We're tracking several different things in the world of weather. The most immediate concern is the colder air coming that will catch many of us off guard, I'm sure, and also that wind and quick clipper system in the north. So prepare again for a quick burst of snow across northern Minnesota and northern plains, but more impactful, we're going to get a pretty wide corridor of some gusty winds moving through the northern US, which could potentially cause some of those power outages and be a little bit more impactful than your everyday wind event. So something we're tracking, and again longer term we're tracking that colder air that's going to be spilling into the middle of March. Thanks y'all for watching. If you want to stay up to date in the world of weather, consider subscribing. Hope y'all have a great day, and I'll see you next time.